Yeah, so my first resource, which I feel like if anyone knows me, this will be no surprise that I'm saying this, but it's a book called Protege, with the tagline "Developing Your Next Generation of Church Leaders" by a guy called Steve Saccone. And I love this book. I mean, I use it loads when I'm mentoring younger leaders. But for me, I love the way that it's written, because it's written so that a younger leader can obviously read it and learn, but it also gives like tips for the mentor to be able to help the younger leader. So I think like to have like those two things in one book is like amazing. So yeah, it's definitely something I think is worth every leader having on their bookshelf to be able to help develop a younger leader.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's dive into that book and find out some of the kind of the pearls of wisdom that's in there. Tell me some of the things that you've learned from the book that have been really helpful in mentoring younger leaders.
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons I love it is because it's just really real. So it's split into 5 parts. And it talks about, firstly, the whole first section is about character, which, if you know anything about Young Lions, our first year of Young Lions is about character. And so I love the fact that it focuses in on that before anything else. And just the topics, even within the character section, are really interesting. So it talks about the sin of imitation, the sin of performance, the sin of overconfidence, and the sin of entitlement. So I always find that whenever I read it, even for myself, but also if I'm reading it alongside a younger leader, that they often read it and are a bit like, whoa, they are quite hefty topics to kind of dive into. But for me, it feels like they really kind of dig into things that I guess we don't always dig into as deeply, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that. The second part is all about relationships, so commitment, conflict, attachment. And then the next parts are about communication, mission, and entrepreneurial leadership. So I feel like it gives kind of a real broad range of topics to be able to work through with a younger leader.
What have you found that's been the most impactful of those? I mean, there's all those three things would be impactful, but what have you found probably the most transformative for how you coach leaders?
I think I've loved the part on entrepreneurial leadership. So I just think it's not always spoken about in terms of like, how do we help younger leaders to think differently about how they're going to reach, the next generation coming through, or how they're going to reach people with the gospel. And sometimes we, I guess, in our minds have a set idea of how that looks in church, but this book really challenges the thinking of that and helps younger leaders to think in different ways about how they're actually going to reach the world around them. So I think, yeah, some of that has been really interesting. But then coming back to the character side of things as well, I think, yeah, always transformative just to see a young leader maybe read something and then be like, oh, I've never really thought of that. I need to really work on that. And I think being able to see that actually outworked has been, yeah, really good.
I guess what we're seeing at the moment is it feels like the youth of the world is, it's constantly changing. It's a constantly changing thing. The youth are
Yeah.
constantly changing. And the coming generation that's coming through seems different from the
Yeah.
generation you and I grew up as
Yeah.
part of. We're both millennials, and but this new sort of Gen Z leaders, how has the landscape changed, and how does that then influence how you mentor leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I always think like when I'm mentoring someone that I need to take a position of wanting to learn as well. And so I often try and think if I'm going into coaching or mentoring a younger leader, this book's really helpful in terms of like setting some topics to talk around. But the reality is this book was written quite a few years ago, and so I'm still using it as a resource whilst at the same time trying to learn from the people that I'm coaching or mentoring. Because like you say, it definitely has changed loads and there's loads of stuff, yeah, that's different. In fact, I was talking to a friend the other day about just probably when we were both growing up, how different the influence of the phone was to what it is now. But I think when you're kind of coaching and helping a young leader to sort of work through some of that stuff, you're there as that encouragement, aren't you, as well as asking the right questions to help them think through to get to the right answers. And so I think it's to do with, how do we come into this attitude of mentoring? Is it, we want to change them completely, or is it that there's a part of it where we're like, no, we actually want to grow through this process as well as the younger leader we're pouring into?
Yeah, very good. What would you say the impact of this book has been on you, or on your ministry? What would you say if you were to sort of sum that up into a short sentence? Well, it doesn't have to be a short sentence. It could be a long sentence if you like.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's obviously been really impactful because I'm still using it. And I think like when I was youth pastoring, often with my youth team, I'd sit down with a group of them and we'd work through some of the sort of topics in the book, which were really helpful. But I think I'm now a few years on from that and in a different, in different environments, but it still seems to me to be as impactful. And I think even for me, as I read it alongside a young leader, obviously my mindset is like, how can I try and help them grow? But actually, every time I read some of these chapters, I'm so challenged myself. How can I ensure that I'm working on my character so that I'm not trying to be somebody else, but I'm actually being myself? Or how am I ensuring that I'm not leading in a way, it's just a performance thing, but I'm actually doing it right before God? So I think even just going over the book over and over again has kind of helped me to constantly be coming back to some of those things and challenging myself in them moving forward.
Yeah, I remember hearing, I think it was Kerry Newhoff, I think, saying that, to work twice as hard on your character as you do on your competency. And I think a lot of books focus on competency, and rightly so. Obviously they're really helpful, but to have something that's specifically for young leaders, starting off. But I think you're right. It's true for everyone that we all need to work on our character. I don't think anyone's here thinking, "Yep, character sorted." But for young leaders to work on character, and that's quite different from every other kind of leadership that you get outside of the church, because not many other places really focus on character. How have you found mentoring leaders and talking about character with them? How does that work out for you? Just looking at that specifically, at that character piece.
Yeah, I think it's great because it makes the younger leader think differently. So like you say, if they're going to lead within the world or the marketplace, often it's more about the skill set. So I think the fact that it's really challenging character and getting a young leader to really think. So I often encourage them to think through some questions that maybe I've set off of the chapter before we meet. So by the time we meet, they've had a chance to kind of think this through and then work out how it outworks in their own sort of daily lives. So I think, it's seeing that happen. And I guess, like I said, those sort of light bulb moments where a young leader will read something and be like, oh, that really affected me, or that's something I really need to go and work on. I think just that realization or that self-awareness that comes through the prompts of what this is saying is really helpful for a young leader.